In 1997, in a quiet corner of San Diego, California, a tragedy unfolded that shocked the entire country. The bodies of 39 people dressed in identical clothing were found in a luxurious mansion. But even more ominous, a chilling message was found at the scene. We leave this world to reach the true reality. The victims were members of a religious group known as the Gates of Heaven, cultists who believed that the world around them was nothing more than an illusion, a kind of testing ground before entering a higher form of existence. They believed that everything around them, news, historical events, even their own emotions, was a carefully constructed lie designed to keep them imprisoned. At first glance, this may seem insane, but think about it, and it becomes clear that this is not the first time in history that people have questioned the authenticity of reality. Long before the San Diego tragedy, ancient Hindu texts referred to Maya, the great illusion that envelops humanity and makes them mistake the perishable for the eternal. But you don't have to delve into ancient philosophy or study cults to sense that something is wrong. After all, each of us has experienced this strange sensation at least once in our lives. Moments that seem to come off the pages of a script, coincidences that seem too perfect, patterns that repeat themselves over and over again like a broken record in a poorly written simulation. One can't help but think, what if everything we see and feel is not the real reality, but only a pale copy of it? You meet a person, and he completes your sentence as if he reads your mind. You turn on the radio, and it plays the exact tune that was playing in your head a moment ago. You remember a vivid episode from the past, but people around you assure you that it never happened. It is easy to write off such cases as mere coincidences, but the more you think about it, the more alarming they are. And here's where it gets interesting. What if we assume that everything we know, all our memories, beliefs, and perceptions of reality are not as immutable as they seem? What if our memories can be changed, our feelings can be deceived, and our entire understanding of life is just an illusion? Science has long proven that reality is changeable and depends on our perception. The famous two-slit experiment conducted by physicists showed that elementary particles behave differently depending on whether they are observed or not. This means that the very act of observation has an effect on the physical world. Think about it for a moment. If reality were as solid and unchanging as we tend to believe, would it change simply because someone is looking at it? All aspects of human existence, from visualizing the world to feeling the passage of time, are subject to constant change and are not something frozen. And the point here is not in the mystical intervention of some higher power, but in the peculiarities of each individual's personal perception, which actively influences, shapes, and even skillfully manipulates everything that a person considers reality. But what happens when this very perception fails and begins to distort the truth? What if a person's entire life, everything that he or she is accustomed to considering as immutable reality, is in fact only a skillfully created illusion, which only pretends to be real, but at the same time carefully hides the true essence of things? The first signs of the impending substitution are already beginning to appear, like cracks on the surface of a perfectly smooth mirror. Reality is something that most people take for granted without questioning. They trust their senses, their thoughts and memories without reservation, believing that they are a true reflection of the world around them. But what if they are all ruthlessly deceptive? And this is not just a fantastical assumption, but a phenomenon that occurs with enviable regularity. Take human memory, for example. It is commonly believed that memories are immutable records of past events, but in fact, they are more like fragile glass that can easily be deformed, altered, or even completely rewritten. A famous psychological study called Lost in the Mall is a case in point. In one scientific experiment, a group of researchers presented participants with 4 stories purportedly taken from their early childhood. Among these stories, 3 were true, while one was an absolute fiction, an account of being lost in a large shopping mall as a child. Initially, most of the participants categorically denied that such an event had ever occurred in their lives. However, after only a few days, something startling and disturbing happened. They began to remember the episode. And it was not just vague fragments of memories, but detailed descriptions. The name of the store near which they were allegedly lost, the sense of panic that gripped them, and even relief when they were found. But the most amazing part was that none of this had ever actually happened. Their minds had been deceptively convinced of the reality of a completely false memory, which nevertheless felt as authentic as any real experience. This raises a legitimate question. If memories can be so easily manipulated, how much can we trust what we remember? And this is just a starting point. All of our perceptions of the world around us pass through the filters of our brains, making them highly unreliable. We see colors, but in reality, colors don't exist as such. They are merely waves of light of different wavelengths that our brain interprets and converts into what we call red, blue, or green. Thus, the reality we perceive is largely a construct of our brain, rather than an objective reflection of the external world. The sense of the passage of time is a subjective experience that scientific research shows is far removed from objective reality. Albert Einstein proved with his revolutionary theories that time is not an unchanging quantity, but rather warped and deformed by gravity and speed. However, the human brain, striving for simplification and orderliness, creates the illusion of a stable and predictable flow of time. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect is the brain's ability to ignore elements of reality. This phenomenon, known as inattentional blindness, was vividly demonstrated in a famous experiment. Subjects were asked to watch a videotape of a basketball game and count the number of passes of the ball between players. Surprisingly, about half of the participants did not notice a man in a gorilla suit, who walked right across the court during the game. This striking fact shows that the brain is able to filter out even the most obvious stimuli when attention is focused on something else. If the brain is able to erase from perception a giant gorilla walking across the stage, a legitimate question arises. What else goes unnoticed? What other aspects of reality escape our attention? And perhaps most importantly, who or what determines what information the brain misses and what information it discards? These questions raise questions about the limits of our perception and how fully we are aware of the world around us. The truth is that the reality around us is not just a given, but a skillfully crafted illusion designed to convince us of its authenticity while concealing the true state of affairs. However, gaps are beginning to appear in this carefully constructed structure, through which a different reality is glimmering. Are we ready to see the world without the usual limitations? Every day when we wake up, we make decisions, form our own views, and make our way through life, confident that our mind is our fortress and our thoughts are born from the depths of our ego. But it is worth considering whether these thoughts really arise spontaneously and independently. What was the root cause of this or that idea that suddenly arose in the mind? Was it truly our thought, or just an echo of an external influence? Every idea we advocate, every belief we defend, every preference we think we have, upon closer examination, turns out to be part of a complex network of influences that we did not consciously choose. Culture, environment, books read, conversations heard, and even information noise all enter our minds, shaping our perception of the world, often without our knowledge. It is amazing how thoughts arise in a person's mind, seeming so organic that their source is unquestionable. It seems as if they are born in some hidden depth. However, a closer look reveals a disturbing picture. Perhaps thoughts are not as individualized as is commonly believed. It is quite possible that the decisions made are nothing more than a conditioned reflex formed under the influence of learned information. The beliefs that one defends with the greatest fervor, one's values, likes and dislikes, even one's self-perception, may not be a reflection of a deeper inner truth, but merely an echo of repetition. If this is indeed the case, then the question arises, what then does it mean to be oneself? Has anyone thought about how much of their reality is borrowed, not stolen or imposed, but imperceptibly absorbed, like water penetrating a sponge? Everyone is born into a world that is already in motion, into systems, traditions and beliefs that existed long before their first. Breath. We were not given to choose the starting points of our lives. They were simply predetermined and handed to us like a baton. And yet, at a certain point, we begin to experience them as something inherently our own, personal. Take, for example, such a simple thing as a name. What seems to be our most intimate, most personal attribute was not really chosen by us. It was given to us before we had the ability to understand the meaning of words. All our lives we respond to it, identify with it, as if it were a reflection of who we are. But what if we had been called by a different name from birth? Would we feel different? Now let us expand this concept beyond just a name. What about the language we speak, the way we think, the values we profess? None of this was invented by us. These elements have been inculcated into our minds through years of experience, repetition, and reinforcement. And here comes the question that begs the question. If every belief, every fear, every preference has been planted in us from the outside, what part of our personality is truly ours? Neuroscientists have made a fascinating discovery while studying decision-making. It turns out that when we are certain we are making a conscious choice, the brain has already made the decision for us a split second before we realize it. This fact calls into question the very idea of free will and makes us question the extent of our control over our own lives. In other words, the stream of consciousness that gives rise to thoughts, beliefs, and actions does not originate in the depths of self-consciousness, as is commonly believed. The brain, like a tireless calculator, continuously analyzes incoming signals, forming a subjective perception of reality long before the mind has time to realize and question what is happening. This process resembles a pre-written script that skillfully imitates free will, creating the illusion of control over the situation, while the individual, in fact, only follows the predetermined path. This raises a legitimate question. What part of the personality is the true essence? If thoughts originate before a decision is made to think about them, and identity is formed under the influence of circumstances and factors not subject to conscious choice, who or what actually controls this complex mechanism? Let us imagine a hypothetical situation, an awakening with no memories of the past, no name, no established identity, just pure, unclouded awareness. The gaze turned toward the world is devoid of the burden of history, prejudices, fears, and expectations. The question arises, will man retain his former self in these radically changed circumstances? This question goes beyond a mere thought experiment to the deepest aspects of human existence. This question goes to the heart of our identity, forcing us to rethink our established notions of self. We tend to believe in the existence of an immutable self, an eternal and unchanging center of our personality. However, the reality turns out to be much more complex and dynamic. Every aspect of who we are is the result of painstaking work, a mosaic of memories, experiences, and learned knowledge that together form the unique version of ourselves that we see in the mirror today. Imagine the amazing fact. Scientific studies show that virtually every cell in our body renews itself within 7 to 10 years. The physical person we were a decade ago no longer exists in the material world. Skin, internal organs, even brain cells, all of them are gradually replaced by new ones. If our body is constantly undergoing changes and our thoughts are in a continuous flux, then what remains unchanged in us? Think about your beliefs. Would you have shared all of your current views 5 years ago? Probably not. And 5 years from now, you might look at the you of today with surprise, disagreeing with many of your current beliefs. If our beliefs, thoughts, and even our physical bodies are subject to constant transformation, what part of us is really us? This question challenges the very concept of a stable and unchanging identity, opening the way to a deeper understanding of ourselves and our role in an ever-changing world. Sometimes, reality presents us with surprising mysteries, and one of the most intriguing is the phenomenon of dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. There are cases of people with this disorder where one personality exhibits the strongest allergic reaction, while the other personality is completely immune to the allergen. Just imagine, the same physical body, but one self suffers from an excruciating rash, while the other suffers no ill effects. It's not just a mind game. It's a clear indication that our minds are capable of shaping not only our thoughts, but our perception of reality itself. If we assume that our reality is malleable, changeable, and constantly shaped by the mind, then a legitimate question arises. Who is the observer of this process? What if we are not the creators of our thoughts, but only the consciousness observing their spontaneous emergence? What if our true nature is not our beliefs, our past experiences, or even our name, but something much more fundamental, something that cannot be changed, labeled, or defined? Wouldn't such a realization turn our view of the world and of ourselves upside down? Let us delve further into this question. There is a concept in modern neuroscience that has the potential to radically change the way you think about your own personality. The theory of predictive intelligence is gaining momentum in the scientific world, a concept that radically changes the way we think about how the brain works. According to this theory, the brain is not just a passive receiver of information from the world around us, but an active creator of reality. In everyday perception, we tend to believe that we see the world directly as it is. However, according to the theory of predictive intelligence, this is not entirely true. The brain is constantly busy predicting reality ahead of sensory experience. It analyzes past memories, identifies patterns, and forms expectations to construct a coherent picture of the world before the senses have a chance to provide their input. Thus, what we perceive as reality is essentially the most likely assumption the brain makes based on the beliefs and knowledge it already holds. This mechanism explains a striking phenomenon: why two people observing the same event can perceive it very differently. For example, a person raised in an atmosphere of fear and mistrust tends to see threats even where there are none, while a person raised in love and support will notice manifestations of kindness and empathy in the same situation. Similarly, A song that did not evoke any emotion in the past may suddenly touch the heart years later, awakening memories and associations previously hidden in the subconscious. The surrounding reality perceived by each individual is not an objective truth, but a subjective illusion, carefully constructed by the neural network of the brain. Paradoxically, it is impossible for a person to see reality in its pristine form, since consciousness acts as a filter that continuously shapes sensory experience. This raises a natural question. If the mind predetermines the perception of reality, who is the true master of the situation? If every thought, every response, every ingrained belief is just an echo of the past, which determines the prism through which one looks at the present, how independent is one's choice? Is he not just a puppet playing out a script written by years of accumulated experience, internalized norms and subconscious assumptions? Such a perspective may seem daunting, but in reality it opens the door to liberation. For if reality is merely a construct, it is therefore possible to recreate it. To illustrate this point, neuroscientists conducted an experiment in which subjects were shown the color blue and asked to describe it. It is noteworthy that some cultures do not even have a lexical label for this color. For some people, a certain shade of green is just a shade of green, an everyday occurrence that doesn't provoke much thought. However, the most striking thing is that these people are actually deprived of the ability to perceive the color blue. Their brains simply do not process the corresponding signals. Think for a moment. Something as elementary as language can define the boundaries of your personal reality. If language, culture, experience, and emotional background form the prism through which you perceive the world, what part of your life really belongs to you, your authentic self? The truth is that reality is not something passively perceived, but an active construct of your mind, its interpretation of the world around it. And if this is true, then your life experience is not just a series of events that happen to you, but the result of your own creativity, active creation. But who is this mysterious you, who is the architect of your reality? After all, if your thoughts shape the world even before you realize it, what is behind these thoughts? What is their root cause? And more importantly, is it possible to awaken from this illusion before it is too late, before the point of no return? Let me delve further into this question. If everything you experience is shaped by your mind long before you realize it, what conclusions can you draw about free will? You live your life convinced that you are making conscious choices, that you are in control of your thoughts, making independent decisions and taking independent actions. But is this really the case? Modern neurobiological research presents a stunning discovery. An individual's decisions are shaped long before they are realized. In one experiment, subjects connected to brain scanning machines were asked to press a button at will. It would seem that the task was not difficult. However, the results were striking. The scanner recorded brain activity that preceded conscious decision-making. The subject's brain made a choice a few seconds before it was realized. It's worth pondering this fact. Before a person is even consciously aware of their choice, their brain has already made up its mind. This suggests that consciousness, the part of the personality that thinks it is in control, actually plays the role of a storyteller who retrospectively comes up with explanations for actions. The question arises, is the person really in control of his life? Or is his mind simply executing a program formed by years of conditioning, habits, and subconscious biases? This raises an even more troubling question. If a person is acting on autopilot, who is actually living his or her life? The vast majority of people live their lives without bothering to think deeply about the nature of their decisions. They go with the flow, reacting automatically to external stimuli and naively believing that their choices are the result of conscious deliberation. Most of the time, however, they find themselves trapped in a vicious cycle of conditioned reactions, ingrained habits, and preconceived beliefs that imperceptibly control their behavior. But do not despair. There is a way out of this labyrinth. The key to liberation lies in realizing the illusory nature of what is happening. As soon as a person begins to observe his thoughts, to follow their course carefully, and not blindly trust them, he begins to notice the first signs of deception. Cracks appear in the consciousness, through which the light of truth breaks through. A person begins to recognize repetitive patterns of thinking, to recognize old, learned reactions that creep into his consciousness. He catches himself that his mind is trying to justify actions that have already been predetermined without his knowledge and participation. And the deeper the observation becomes, the more consciousness is awakened. This process can be compared to coming out of a deep sleep and realizing that reality has been different all along. It is no coincidence that ancient spiritual traditions such as Buddhism and Stoicism have always emphasized the development of mindfulness rather than violent thought control. It is mindfulness as a powerful tool that allows destructive thoughts and emotions to be stripped of their power, because the moment a person realizes something, it loses its ability to control them. The essence is the following. The flow of thoughts will not stop. The mind will continue its activity according to the given schemes. However, if it is possible to take a step back and take the position of an observer, instead of getting lost in the chaos of consciousness, a person will regain control over himself, without forcibly changing or attempting to control the mind, but with acceptance of its current state. After all, once the veil of illusion falls away, there is no going back to the former. And it is at this very moment that transformation takes place. But the question arises, is awakening really possible? Or will the mind sink back into the world of dreams? Reaching this point already puts one ahead of many, but realization and actually living in accordance with this realization are two different levels. Therefore, if there is a willingness to see the illusory nature of the world in its entirety, it is worth signing up and continuing to explore. Truth is not somewhere far away. It is here and now.